In short, ICO ruled that the names of the examiners were Tsai Ing-wen's personal data, as well as the personal data of the thesis examiners. They also ruled that the date of the so-called Viva examination was also Tsai Ing-wen's personal data. So for number 27, the ICO defines what it considers to be necessary in order to process the request of the complainant from the public authority. So it defines what is called the legitimate interest test, whether a legitimate interest is being pursued in the request for information. Then there's a necessity test, whether disclosure of the information is necessary to meet the legitimate interest in question. And then there's the balancing test, whether the above interests override the legitimate interests or fundamental rights and freedoms of the data subject. Number 31, the complainant is interested in the legitimacy of President Tsai's 1984 thesis. He is concerned that the thesis was not filed with the LSE's library until 2019, and that the filed copy appears to be a draft document. He says that this graduate has a non-doctoral instructor as an advisor, which he also considers casts doubt on the thesis's validity. In the commissioner's view, the legitimacy or otherwise of President Tsai's thesis is a private concern for the complainant. However, given the position of one of the data subjects, President Tsai, there may be some broader public interest in the matter. Well, given that it's illegal to fake your academic background in the Republic of China, I would say that there is quite a great interest in the legitimacy of this degree. Number 32. Necessary means more than desirable, but less than indispensable or absolute necessity. Accordingly, the test is one of reasonable necessity and involves consideration of alternative measures which may make disclosure of the requested information unnecessary. Disclosure under the FOIA must therefore be the least intrusive means of achieving the legitimate aim in question. Well, that was rather wordy, and I'm getting the hint that this isn't going anywhere. Number 34. In its submission to the commissioner, the university has explained that recipients of PhD degrees in almost all cases have their thesis listed in publicly searchable university library, and therefore the confirmation of a qualification can be determined via this route. Number 35. The university has told the commissioner that it holds a copy of the examination report for the thesis and the thesis copyright submission form. There is also a record of the individual and the thesis on the university's pass list published in that year. Furthermore, there is a listing of President Tsai's thesis Unfair Trade Practices and Safeguard Actions in the Institute of Advanced Legal Studies Index document, Legal Research in the United Kingdom 1905 to 1984, which was published in 1985. The original copy held by the university library was lost or misshelved sometime between the mid-1980s and 2010s, over which period there were numerous structural changes to the library. Number 37. The university has advised that, in its response to separate FOI requests, it has stated that it holds records of the Viva and the pass list in regard to this graduate, President Tsai, and can therefore confirm the award of the degree. Number 38. The university's position is that the validity of President Tsai's 1984 thesis is confirmed because the thesis is published and available online. Other information is held, such as the Viva associated with the thesis, and the university's contemporaneous pass list containing President Tsai's name. That also supports a position that the thesis is legitimate. In addition, a public statement to the effect has been made by the college at which President Tsai was registered. Number 39. To a large degree, the commissioner agrees that the validity of the thesis has been demonstrated and that releasing the thesis examiner's names and the requested date is not necessary to meet the complainant's legitimate interests. However, for the sake of completeness, the commissioner will accept the disclosure as necessary, and she has gone on to conduct the balancing test. Balance between legitimate interests and the data subject's interest or fundamental rights and freedoms. So this is where the University of London is clearly lying. First of all, the thesis that is published online is just a draft document, and anyone who's looked at it would know that. There's no mention of the fact that the thesis published online in 2019 is just a draft document. Other information that is held, such as the Viva associated with this thesis, probably do not actually exist. Tsai Ing-wen's name being on the pass list also means nothing if there is no thesis. There's this assumption that the University of London must be telling the truth because they have these so-called documents. What is most disappointing about all of this is that the Information Commissioner Office is assuming that the University of London is telling the truth simply because they say that they hold these documents without releasing any of them. Based on these assumptions, the ICO determines that the names of the thesis examiners and the date do not need to be disclosed. So therefore, the ICO is saying the same thing that the presidential office in Taiwan is saying. The University of London said it, so therefore it must be true, even though the University of London refuses to disclose any documents that would prove that what they're saying is true. Number 41. In considering this balancing test, the Commissioner has taken into account the following factors: the potential harm or distress that disclosure may cause, whether the information is already in the public domain, whether the information is already known to some individuals, whether the individual expressed concern to the disclosure, and the reasonable expectations of the individual. Number 45. In its submission to her, the university has told the Commissioner that its general policy is that it does not disclose details of a graduate's degree to a third party without the consent of the individual, or whether required to by a legal exemption in the Data Protection Act 2018. In some cases, the university may weigh out the legitimate interest and confirm a qualification has been obtained. Further details, such as the classification of the degree, copies of coursework, registration details, dates of completion, are not disclosed. Number 47. It says that the students will have a high expectation that records of their registration and their attendance at the university, which may reference a number of factors relating to their professional and personal life, would not be subject to public disclosure. Even in the case of a PhD thesis, where there is an expectation that the thesis would be publicly available, there is no expectation that further records of assessment would be disclosed. The nature of the disclosure would have an impact on the university's position on the privacy and confidentiality of all its student records. Now, I'm not quite sure what all of that means, given that PhD theses are supposed to be publicly available. They're still saying that disclosure of the Viva examination and the names of the examiners are protected under privacy, despite the fact that there is no record that the thesis was ever turned into these libraries. And on top of that, she has no finished approved thesis posted online.
I try to find it at IRS. There's no.
When is it?
1984.
1984. I'm assuming if it has gone lost or somehow not archived, that could be a possibility.
But both places and the main library of RSC, the three places doesn't
show up at
no
all.
form, no.
I really have no idea.
No idea? Okay.
I never heard of such a situation, so I
Never
don't
heard of it?
really know, no. If you want, I don't know what we can do. If it doesn't come up, there's nothing we can actually do.
Number 48. The university says it has thousands of graduates. Many have progressed to positions of power and influence in public life. It has noted that the PhD qualification in question precedes this individual's political career. It makes the point that a degree qualification is not essential for a political career in the same way that a medical degree would be for a physician. That is true. It is not a requirement for the role of the President of the Republic of China to have a PhD. If it were, and President Tsai's PhD was not legitimate, that might be a concern. What is of issue is whether the university's process for assessing and awarding PhDs is valid in all cases. Well, this sounds like they're saying it's not necessary for us to disclose this because it's not necessary for a president of the Republic of China to have a PhD degree. I've already pointed out that on the University of London's own website for theses, all graduates from that period of time have a thesis posted online. They are all searchable. This is simply disgraceful that the University of London and the ICO have this position. And for the ICO's own information, it is illegal to fake an academic degree and be a public servant in the Republic of China. Therefore, what Tsai Ing-wen is doing is in all likelihood illegal, and the University of London, the London School of Economics, and the ICO of the United Kingdom are enabling her in continuing this academic fraud that has been going on since 1983. Number 49. It is unfortunate that the copy of President Tsai's thesis that the university library held was lost or misplaced between the mid-1980s and 2010 during various restructuring changes to the library. This may have been why that version of the thesis was not published in the period after 1984. However, in response to a request for it from the LSE, President Tsai provided LSE with a copy of the thesis that she held. The LSE has published a copy of this thesis that it received from President Tsai since 2019. The complainant considers the published thesis appears to be a draft. It may or may not be a draft version, but this is the version of her thesis that President Tsai still held, some 35 years after first writing it. The Commissioner understands that the paper copy of the thesis that the university received from President Tsai, and which it has converted to an electronic version and published, is the only paper copy it has been able to locate at this point. So in number 49, the ICO makes it very, very obvious that they are doing a cover-up job for Tsai Ing-wen. There is absolutely no mention of the fact that in their computer system, the thesis was never received.
It looks like we don't have that one, unfortunately. Is it a University of London thesis?
LSE's, yeah, it should be 1984.
Yeah.
So, is it possible missing or just?
Or maybe we never received it. I don't know. If it was missing, if we had received it, it would be on the catalogue, but it would say missing.
Oh.
But if it's just not there, that suggests that we never received it.
Okay, so here is IARS library, right?
Yeah.
So this
Institute of Advanced Legal Studies, but LSE library, maybe we should have a copy.
Is it possible there's somewhere in a different catalog of IARS?
No,
system?
we only have one catalogue.
Okay, so the answer is no.
So it's definitely not an issue of losing a physical copy. They keep assuming that a copy was turned in, but it was just lost. If it was lost, there would be a record in the card catalog system, but nowhere in this report from ICO is there any mention of the fact that it's not in the card catalog system for any of the 3 libraries.
So isn't it possible there anywhere else we can find the
Well, the
thesis?
3 places to check would be here, LSE Library and the Senate House Library. You know, the big white building over there. They're the 3 places that should, in theory, all have a copy of a University of London PhD thesis. So
What is the possibility that all 3 places are missing?
I don't know. I've got no idea. I would think it's very unlikely.
And this can be confirmed in their own library, yet ICO did not do this research or is simply not interested in this fact. Therefore, the analysis provided here is basically based on a falsehood. It's based on an assumption that it was there and then it was lost. They won't even admit that the personal copy provided is just a draft document. The ICO is using the same line of logic as the University of London and LSE regarding this matter. They act like it was lost. So out of all the other graduates in 1984, none of their thesis papers were lost. All of them are searchable in the card catalog system. This isn't really a believable story. In fact, it's extremely contradictory for the LSE to declare that she's a PhD holder from their school, while at the same time, her thesis is not searchable in their own system. Only one other graduate from that time period had her thesis rejected because of plagiarism issues, supposedly. So therefore, that person no longer has a degree from the LSE. Yet Tsai still has a degree from the LSE even though she has no thesis at all. There is a link to her thesis in the Senate House Library, yet at the same time it's not searchable. That's rather contradictory. If there is a link for the Senate House Library, it must be searchable. It should either say not available and no, or link and yes. Only Tsai Ing-wen says link and no. Number 50. However, other information such as the thesis's inclusion in the IALS index in 1985 evidenced that at that time the thesis had been completed and assessed. Number 51. At issue here is whether President Tsai's PhD was valid and properly awarded by the university and, more generally, whether the public can trust the university's processes. The complainant has his particular concerns, but the commissioner considers that the university has demonstrated sufficient transparency in the matter of this PhD thesis. She has no compelling reason to doubt that the university's award processes were not robust in 1984 or now. Such public interest as there is in the matter of this thesis is outweighed by the data subjects, that is, President Tsai's and in particular the examiner's reasonable expectations. Neither President Tsai nor the examiners would have expected this personal data to be released so many years before the introduction of the FOIA. While President Tsai might reasonably expect this now, the Commissioner considers that disclosure remains beyond the examiner's expectations. It is therefore possible that disclosing this information would cause them distress. Unfortunately, the ICO is doing nothing but repeating what the University of London and London School of Economics are claiming. This entire issue is not being looked at objectively. First of all, there is a great deal of evidence that is missing if the thesis and the PhD degree were in fact real. Continuing to quote the thesis's inclusion in the IALS index in 1985 is not a strong piece of evidence at all, considering that there's no direct evidence that the thesis actually exists. The ICO does not find it strange that the thesis is in fact missing and was never turned into any of the libraries. That is the key piece of evidence. And yet the commissioner continues to talk about privacy for examiners that most likely do not exist. Let's take a look at what a real thesis looks like in 1984 and judge for ourselves if there is valid reason to doubt whether or not Tsai Ing-wen's PhD thesis is in fact legitimate. So here's the cover page for the copyright declaration for Molina Vega Jose Enrique. Here's his title page for his thesis, Italian Eurocommunism on State and Law. And you can see that it's submitted in part fulfillment of PhD degree in law at London School of Economics and Political Science. Therefore, it would be safe to assume that the London School of Economics and Political Science has some kind of record of this PhD graduate if you ask them. But yet, for some reason, no details can be disclosed about Tsai Ing-wen's so-called thesis. Here's a side-by-side comparison of a legitimate thesis in blue and Tsai Ing-wen's thesis in black. A dead giveaway that Tsai Ing-wen never had a thesis in 1984 is that she couldn't even get the thesis right cosmetically, and also that her last draft in her possession was double-sided. If she really turned one in back then, she would know that all the theses are single-sided. When Tsai Ing-wen turned in her personal copy in 2019, it not only had unnumbered pages, but it also had missing pages. Added to the fact that it has double-sided pages, it did not look anything like a legitimate thesis from that period of time.
有漏页吗？没有啊。有立可白吗？没有啊。你看 ，list of tables 清清楚楚。
好，我先简单说明。所以各位看得到，这是原稿。那原稿为什么会没有装订呢？很简单，因为当年只能用影印的，所以你如果第一本把它装订了，你后面还要再拆开来影印，事实上是有困难，因为我们没有其他的储存的这个设备。
看到没？向左对齐，哪来的两边对齐啊？单面印刷。
Number 52. That a different public authority in a different set of circumstances released examiners' names in the past is not relevant here. The commissioner considers each case on a case-by-case basis. Based on the above factors, the commissioner has determined in this case that there is insufficient legitimate interest to outweigh the data subject's fundamental rights and freedoms. The commissioner therefore considers that there is no Article 6 basis for processing, and so the disclosure of the information would not be lawful. Well, I've just shown here from many points of view that there is in fact many reasons to doubt the legitimacy of this so-called PhD thesis, but the Information Commissioner Office only took into account what the London School of Economics and the University of London provided. Therefore, this argument that releasing data would be unlawful is just more excuses. It's just not coming from the universities anymore. It's coming from the Information Commissioner Office, but they're actually all saying the same thing. Number 53. Given the above conclusion that disclosure would be unlawful, the Commissioner considers that she does not need to go on to consider separately whether disclosure would be fair or transparent. The Commissioner's view. Number 54. The Commissioner has decided that the university was entitled to withhold the information under Section 42 by way of Section 43A. Well, I guess that's all she wrote.
学位是真的假不了啊，有学位就是一定有论文啊，所以这个也假不了。